Well,
All right.
welcome to another episode of What the Fuck Did I Just Watch? And we
Yeah,
are going to
thank you.
discuss Dogma today. And I'm going to hand it over to Jean-Paul because this was his pick and his guest, who I'm also very happy to have on the show. So I'll let him go.
Thank you.
All right. So, like Jenny said, we are going to do one of my favorite Kevin Smith movies and one of the most controversial Kevin Smith movies, and actually one of probably the most controversial movies in a while. But yes, we do have our special guests. We have my mother-in-law, Mary Cummins Wlodarski. Yes, we're going to be very formal today because this show is very formal, and we want to hit the high standards of Sam the Eagle. So yeah.
I want Jenny's background. I want to be in the movie.
I have too much fun with Zoom backgrounds. Now, Mary, we were talking earlier. You said you teach at UD, University of Dayton. Is that right?
Well, I'm an adjunct at UD, which means, the people on the bottom of the barrel. But but I'm not working in, my whole background's been in theology and ministry, but that's not what I'm doing at UD. At UD, I'm working at the Learning Training Center and working with students who are having a hard time adjusting to the university or to university life, which, as you can imagine, in the last year with COVID has been a real interesting.
I bet that's a whole new world of work
idea.
for you, isn't it?
Yeah, but I actually think Jean-Paul asked me because I've got over 40 years in Catholic lay ministry, and I have my master's in theology, and I also worked as spiritual director for a while, sometimes at United Theological Seminary, which is a Methodist seminary, although it has pastors from all different faiths. So I like to think I've always had a pretty broad-minded view of what spirituality is all about, but it's certainly gotten broader as I've gotten older. So, which I think is good. But I think Jean-Paul and I actually might have talked about Dogma one time, and I told him that I liked it, which I don't remember if it surprised him.
It did surprise me because, again, this movie had such a big controversy from I believe it was the Catholic League. It wasn't even the Catholic Church. It was the Catholic League. So, and that's the misconception of a lot of people, I think, when they think of this movie. They're like, oh, all Catholics hate this movie and this is going to be bad for Catholicism. And they're just, ripping anew and left and right in this movie. And half of them didn't even really watch the movie or know what the movie really was about.
Right. And actually, the first time I saw it, which would have been the year it came out, my husband and I went to see it. And as I was walking out, I said to him, that was actually an amazingly Catholic film. Which, as we talk, I can point out to you why I said that. But that was actually my first reaction. Like we said earlier, other than the poop monster, and I probably could have used a few less fucks.
Well, I mean, it is Kevin Smith. He did grow up in a Catholic home. Right. He did was a good Catholic boy, as they said. He said when rewatching this and then looking for interviews, he's like, I grew up. I went through the Catholic Church. I went to Sunday school. We even went to Catholic school. I know everything. When I cited things, it wasn't like I was just talking out of my ass.
No, it was very educated.
Yeah.
The movie.
Yeah, no, he's not mistaken. He is not 100% accurate, which I wouldn't expect.
Right.
Truthfully. There's a couple things that I would say probably he has about an 8th grade to high school level understanding of Catholicism, which is all most people have it. That's not an unusual thing. But he doesn't get anything terribly wrong. Let me put it that way. He doesn't. But there are a couple things that, miss the mark a little bit. But he didn't want it to be a theological treatise.
Exactly.
He wanted it to be a satire. And in that way, I think he succeeds.
Yeah, I actually, on rewatching it, and actually even pre-watching, my thought about it was him searching for a justification for his own faith. It's kind of the feel the movie had for me, where he had clearly grown up Catholic, and I have empathy for that. I had been raised Catholic as well. And he was, I think, just struggling to find some spark of the divine out of, a lot of what Catholicism can do to you as a child, especially when you become disillusioned with the church or people that follow it. And that was kind of the impression I got. And that's kind of, I think, why they kept putting back that it wasn't just being stuck in a belief, it was having an idea and going with that. And I thought that was a wonderful point in the movie. Though I don't think belief itself can be bad, but when you just stick to it,
Yeah. The way they defined it, I thought was very, very good. Most people don't change beliefs. Yeah. It was his premise, but you can change an idea. I would say you can change a belief. Because I've changed them over my life. But I don't know. I think it's you can't change orthodoxy. That's the very word, is orthodox, which means it's the truth. Mm-hmm. And the moment I hear anyone talk about the truth, I get very nervous.
Yeah.
Because it's that I don't think there is a truth. This is fun. I'm going to be able to say whatever I want on this.
You can.
Because I'm retired. They can't do anything to me.
And you can even say some fucks if you want.
Yeah. But
no pressure.
At least they won, But I do think that I think he does a nice job of satirizing the orthodoxy, the inflexibility, and truthfully, it made me think of something else I've seen in the meantime, which was the Book of Mormon, which is a play that also does a wonderful job of satirizing orthodoxy and pointing out the deficits in believing without questioning. That is dangerous. I don't think anyone should believe without questioning, ever.
I completely agree with that.
I 100% agree with you on that. I mean, and that's what I think was quite interesting about this movie, because it even starts with a disclaimer, which I think is one of the best disclaimers in any movie, and that's him basically saying, hey, this is fantasy. Don't think that this is what I actually believe, that this is law, this is fantasy. And then he pleads to the critics, which is great, because his last few movies before this, I think Mallrats was the one right before this, and it was not a commercial hit for him, and it also wasn't a critical hit. So I think he was just like, well, if the critics are going to hate me because they love my first two movies, let's see how I can do if I can go ahead and put a disclaimer. And then he comes back and then adds the funny part of the disclaimer, which is the platypus.
Yes. And then apologizes to the platypus. Yeah, I love that.
So
I mean to offend platypus
people. Yeah. And so I mean, it's satire. The whole movie is satire, but like we've discussed, there is some foundation in some of his beliefs that he put on there because he wrote his word. And it's fascinating rewatching it now, 20 years later. This is a movie, like we said, came out in 1999. I remember seeing it in the first go time, and I thought, okay, this is just going to be a kind of another Kevin Smith, which was, by then his generation was Cheech and Chong, Jay and Silent Bob. They were basically goofy stoners getting into goofy adventures, and then Kevin Smith sometimes throws some heart. I mean, Chasing Amy definitely threw in a lot of heart into that movie. This one just does it completely different, by, I think, definitely the cast that he has, because it's probably one of the best casts in any movie.
It's an amazing cast.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, and the fact that, like I said, I did some research. They all worked for scale, which scale is essentially minimum wage for people. But everybody loved his previous work, and then he gave them the script, and people loved the script and said, yeah. I mean, Alan Rickman, who is, Hans Gruber was one of the biggest roles.
I miss him.
Yeah, we all do, because he's a phenomenal actor.
Yeah.
And in this movie, he deserves some kind of acting award because of the way he does.
He was so amazing.
So good.
He is.
Yeah, actually, I read that his rule was, if he was going to be in this movie, that one, he wanted real wings for the angel scenes and not CGI, and that he didn't want a word change in the script of his lines. He wanted to be exactly what he read. He didn't want Kevin Smith to do any rewrites or change any of his lines.
Wow.
And when Kevin Smith said, "You will have wings for the shots with wings that are real, not CGI, and I will not change a word," and he was like, "Yep, I'm on it. That's fine."
Yeah, and I actually, most of the stuff I looked up was about angels, and because I wanted to see how much of the tradition was actually used in the film. But I found out that Kevin Smith avoided, with Bartleby and Loki, using real, and I was going to say real angel names. Okay.
No, we know what you mean.
We know what you mean.
Using names.
Documented angel names.
Associated with it. But and he did that deliberately, from what I could see, that he didn't want Gabriel and Michael, which are the only two angels mentioned in the canon of Scripture. So so he avoided them. But Azrael is, however, an angel's name. Azrael was the angel of death. So I don't know. I mean, Loki's the angel of death in this film, but Azrael's a stinker of his own making, and certainly has no problem with death. But anyway, so as I was reading on it, though, I did find that poor Kevin Smith had been threatened with death threats.
Very much so, yeah.
When this came out, and that actually angered me. Because I think if you're that insecure in what you believe, that somebody saying something different from you makes you want to kill them, that's on you. That's your insecurity. That's your mess up. That's I have never felt that someone, well, I haven't felt since I was like 12, like someone who disagreed with me was wrong. Yeah, it's, of course, the older I get, the less I'm sure what's right. So I think that's why I like the film better this time, because it has more mystery about it than I remember. There's a lot that is unsaid, especially at the end, a lot that's unanswered. And like, are all those people that God cleaned up, are they back alive somewhere?
Just,
I mean,
or was he just being a street sweeper and cleaning up?
Yeah, exactly. Or are they just clean? I mean, did it never happen? Or
yeah, what happened to George Carlin? Is he splattered all over the ground somewhere? Yeah.
And Kevin doesn't tell us, and I think that's fine, because it's a film about faith. It's not supposed to cross every T and dot every I. And of course, I love, love, love the playfulness of God. That was my favorite part the first time I saw it, and it's my favorite part now. It's right up there with Buddy Jesus, which still makes me laugh every time.
Also, wow.
Yeah, I'm on your side. Well, I may get myself in trouble and all of you in trouble, but crucifixes were, with the actual body, was not used in the earliest Christian church. The cross was used, and the fish was used as a symbol of Jesus, and some other things were, but they didn't actually put the body on until more like the Middle Ages. And if you remember what was going on with the plagues and the wars, and it was a time of great superstition. And I think that's when, at least this is what I have been taught in church history, that's when the corpus, the bleeding Jesus, became very popular, to put him on the cross, because people wanted to identify with the suffering of Christ. Whereas in the earliest church, really, it was the resurrection of Christ that was important. So Kevin, in some ways, is sending us back to the earliest Christian theme of, God bursts out of that body and everything's right in the world again, rather than a lot of suffering. And indeed, the suffering is not really in God's plan, you think. And I mean, that's the feeling I got anyway, was that Matt Damon was kind of going rebel with all this killing. Not that it wasn't deeply funny when he held the gun to the woman's head and said, "But you didn't say God bless me." See, those are the moments that I thought, how could anyone take this so seriously that they would be threatened by it? It's so obviously.
And I totally agree with you, because I also think, I mean, I was, when I was born, we went to the Catholic Church until I was about 5th or 6th grade. And then I started going to the Episcopal Church. And I felt like I saw a completely different world. I saw the world, not the suffering world. I saw, hey, God is love, and he loves everyone, you know, no matter who they are. And that's what I really saw more in that movie, like you said, because it wasn't so like, oh my gosh, you see the nails and all of the imagery that I saw when I was younger, because, you know, I'm Hispanic, so I went to some deep Catholic churches where they had that imagery, you know, and the Madonna there and some of that stuff, and just like, whoa.
Crown
then I saw
the dots coming off.
Yeah, then I saw the other side of things. I saw more, like you said, the fish and the love, and also, I mean, if Jesus and God taught us anything, it was to love each other and love thy neighbor. So you're telling me your neighbor you want to kill now? You're giving him death threats? That's absolutely absurd. I think it really is. But even though, yes, Kevin Smith did get those death threats, there's also on YouTube, I actually found it this afternoon. There was a local station in New Jersey that was picketing the movie, and he went out there and got interviewed, but the interviewer did not know he was Kevin Smith.
How could you not know he was? I mean, well, I guess.
Well, to be fair, at that time, Kevin Smith wasn't that well known.
Right.
You know, being so now you couldn't.
It's really funny because they're like, the interviewer is just like, so, you know, this is a really bad movie. And he was like, well, it has to be because the church is saying it is. And they're like, well, have you watched it? He's like, well, no, the church is telling me not to, so it's going to be bad.
You know, and I know one of their big problems with the film was abortion. That is, even to this day, right now, you know, right? Going on with President Biden. It's and the American Catholic bishops and that absolute nonsense. But I won't take us there because then I'll start ranting. But I do. Abortion is sort of the litmus test, and being who I am, I mean, I got to tell you, I do think abortion is wrong. I mean, in the sense that I wish we could keep women from being trapped into doing that. But I also counseled a lot of women over 40 some years that have had abortions, and they don't go into it so they can afford a new fur coat. I mean, it's a difficult decision. It's not. And the other thing that drives me crazy is, yes, I do think abortion's wrong. I don't want it illegal because I want it safe and rare, right? But I want it safe. We're not going to stop abortion by making it illegal. We're just going to drive people into butcher shops again. But I do think it's not the only wrong in the world. It's not the, you know, we act like it is, that's the sin and everything else is not. So, you know, children starving at the border is not a sin. You know,
rape is not a sin.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the elderly, war is not a sin. I mean, oh, come on, guys, you know, we've got lots of tax evasion. You know, if you're trying to avoid giving money to a government so that people who need the governmental support aren't going to get the money, that's sinful. So I don't know why we act like this is the only sin. It is not the only sin. And, you know, I would even argue that it's not the worst because so few women would choose it if they had another option. I mean, a logical option. But if you're 14 and you've been raped, or you're, of course, you're not in a state to carry. And that whole third term abortion thing is so nonsense. I thought Pete Buttigieg, I think that's how you say his name, said it the best, because he said a third term abortion is a tragedy. If somebody is held on to a pregnancy to a third term, then something has gone terribly, terribly wrong.
They didn't want to lose that child.
Exactly.
That was not something they said, you know what? I don't think I want to do this.
Yeah,
No.
I changed my mind. Yeah. And that really struck me, because that's often a bludgeon that people hit women over the head with. But that's why I often find myself saying, are you really pro-life, or are you pro-birth? Yeah, because there's a difference. If you really care about what's going to happen, you have to care about them after they're alive too, not just in the 9 months before. But I know that is the litmus test in Catholics, and that is the hot button issue, and I'm sure that's what people were most afraid of. Now, here's what cracks me up: the film doesn't romanticize abortion.
No, not even one bit.
The main character is suffering because she had a botched abortion.
I thought she had an infection and she couldn't get pregnant.
Right, she had. Well, I watched the extended version too.
Do tell.
And in the extended version, she mentions that she went to sort of a backstreet butcher, and yes, he did it badly, and he caused an infection, and that's what. So
I had never seen the extended version, so thank you for that, Mary.
Yeah, so that's and he, and they cut it out, and I thought, they're not even criticizing him for the right thing. Let me put it that way. He didn't glamorize it, and he certainly didn't act like it was such a simple thing. He showed the protesters. He showed the fear. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, I get tired of that being the main issue, though. Like, yeah, okay, I'm off my box now.
Well,
the plenary indulgence idea is what made me think when I walked out, oh my God, this is such a Catholic movie. Who the hell even uses the term plenary indulgence except Catholics? I mean, it was like, wow. He doesn't use it quite correctly, but again, we're going to give him latitude to the satire. You don't automatically get forgiven in a plenary indulgence. You do have to do things like be sorry for your sin and that kind of stuff. But and I don't believe in indulgences, so I am now speaking of that which I don't believe in. But I do think the idea of him, you remember that scene in the airport where he says, well, Matt Damon says, well, it's just a church law. It's a mad law. Why would God have, and he goes, oh no, God promised Peter that whatever he did on earth, whatever he held true on earth would be held true in heaven. And I was sitting there in the theater going, oh, I know a lot of unhappy non-Catholics right now. I mean, who number one, don't buy the whole Peter is the first pope thing, which I don't either, but that's another story. Jesus didn't make anyone pope. He never turned to Peter and said, you're my first pope. He wouldn't know what the hell that word meant, let alone name someone pope. But it also, that whole idea of the infallibility in the Catholic Church, non-Catholics are not fond of that concept. Most Catholics I know aren't fond of that concept. So, and again, that's not used correctly either. That there's only been twice in the church history where infallibility has been used, and both of them were Mary statements, the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption. So it's not like the Pope wakes up in the morning and goes, blue is the best color. Write that down. That's an infallible statement. So
we know it's purple though.
Yeah.
So interestingly to me, it's like, as I mentioned, I was raised Catholic, and I became a non-believer very early in my life, like 8, because there was just things in my life that made me just not feel what the Catholic Church was laying down at that point in time. But what's funny to me is like, my father remained a staunch Catholic for the most part. staunch being loosely used, but
Yeah.
and my mother had gone through periods where, so they got divorced, they both remarried. My mother was able to get an annulment, my father was not. But my mother married a man who did not get his first marriage annulled. So, they couldn't participate in any of the sacraments. But I bring this up because years and years later, I have a half sister who's 16 years younger than I am. When she was going, they started raising her in the church, which was funny because when they were no longer allowed to have sacraments, my mother and stepfather were not about it at that time. They didn't take us there. I went through basically the motions of confirmation just because that was a family tradition. But the church we went through at the time, the Catholic church we went through at the time in Youngstown, had a priest that was a little more progressive. So like when I went and did my confirmation, I flat out told him I didn't buy it. I told him what I had issues with. And his answer was, well, go through confirmation anyway, because at some point you may change your mind and you're all set up and you don't need to upset your family by not doing this just because you don't believe right now. And this same priest was in charge of that church while my little sister was growing up. And so he just started allowing people to partake in the sacraments again, regardless of, not.
God bless him.
But once he left, so like at that point, then my mother and stepfather were gung ho. And I had told them, like, you do understand that if you walk in any other church and they know that you're not going to be able to. I'm like, unless that church also has a progressive priest. So, yeah. So I'm not sure why you're advocating, Nina having my little sister being Catholic again. And it's great that this priest is progressive. It's great that you're here being comfortable, but maybe you really need to think about the fact that if this guy leaves, you're back at where you were. And that's exactly what happened. And once that happened, then my stepfather and my mother were very upset and offended that they no longer could partake of the sacraments. My stepfather was acting as a deacon at one point. So, yeah, and it was just funny to me because it was like, if they had more priests like that, and if they would change, they would have more people in the church. But the fact that they are so, it is this way, and only if you're really lucky and you have a priest that's like, just come on. And I thought it was interesting when I was watching Dogma that it seemed the same way where you had George Carlin with the buddy Jesus, like, come to Catholicism, we're different, it's the new church,
we're getting better,
and it's like it was just so very it was very similar to what had happened in this one Youngstown church, and then what happened when that priest got moved. So I was like,
I got to tell you, Jenny, your story is not unusual. I mean, it really isn't. You're absolutely right. I've worked with, I don't even know how many different pastors. I think between 8 and 10 different pastors. And I think I've worked with some of the kindest, smartest, holiest people I've ever met. And I've worked with some down and out assholes. And it all boiled down to how did they treat the people around them, not following the law. And that's what Dogma gets right. What Dogma gets right is they keep going back to, but what did Jesus really do? I mean, they, like Rufus saying, Jesus is black. And people still, which I find incredibly hard to believe, act like that's a shock. And I'm
blasphemy.
I'm like, have you looked at where that land is, where Judah is, at the time that it's in Africa, for God's sake.
Mary was white-skinned, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed.
Yeah, they were not from Norwegia that had gotten Norwegian, they were from Norway. That's the word I'm trying to get to. That got lost and ended up in the Holy Land somewhere. In fact, the only reason that Israel looks so white right now, or European, is because the state of Israel was started after World War II. And a lot of the Jews, to escape the oppression that they were under in Europe, came to Israel. If you look at the actual people who grew up in that area, they're the Palestinians. I mean, they're the ones that really look like they're from the area. So I thought Dogma did a good job of getting that kind of stuff right. And Jesus was way ahead of his time in his attitude towards women, to let women sit and be taught by him. Mary Magdalene's one of the first women he sees after the resurrection. She is the first woman he sees after the resurrection. All of the women in the Gospel of John are incredibly important and incredibly strong. And that's the one written the longest after Jesus died. So that's representative of that early Christian church. The women were active. St. Paul wouldn't have said to women, you must sit down and shut up, if they weren't standing up and talking. So I think we've gotten away from that. We've let the orthodoxy, as I've said, overrule. The tail is now wagging the dog. We're really not. I had a very clear moment in my life where, while I was still in ministry, I realized that my goal in ministry was not to see how many people I could keep from receiving a sacrament. My goal was to see how many people I could encourage to receive a sacrament. That changed everything in the way I approach things. I didn't have any requirements anymore. So in fact, one of my colleagues said to me, well, I'm requiring that a child be in our religious ed program for 3 years before we confirm them. What do you require? And I said, I require them to come up and ask me if they can be confirmed. It's like, I don't require anything like that. It's not mine to give. Again, Dogma got that right. It's not George Carlin's to give. I mean, it's not the cardinals to give. It's not the bishops to give. It's not the priests to give. If we're serious about the gifts of faith, they come directly from God. Anyone else is just in the way. They shouldn't be. They should be helping. But oftentimes, as your story goes, Jenny, they're in the way. I'm preaching. I'm sorry.
No, we're just listening and absorbing.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I mean, honestly, this is so good.
But I don't want to lose the fun of Dogma. Jay's ability, and I didn't catch this first time around. Jay's ability to predict what's going to happen is startling once you know to look for it.
Even the whole part where he's like, okay, 5 minutes left, the world's going to destroy what you said.
You said.
He knew it was going to happen in the diner before they left.
Yeah, and
he's supposed to be a prophet. So.
He was the prophet. That's exactly it.
Exactly, and I didn't catch that the first time.
That was the whole thing. He was the prophet. I mean, more behind the stuff that I learned, which I thought was kind of hilarious, is Kevin Smith was so happy to get Alan Rickman to come and do this role because he said that's the A-list man. How could I have this wonder A-list actor? So he took Jay aside and he said, look, you have to behave on this set and I don't want you messing up any of your lines. So Jason Mewes memorized the full script, everybody's part.
Yes.
So there is a couple scenes, if you really rewatch it closely, he mouths somebody else's line before they say it when they're both in the shot. And then he said that apparently like Alan Rickman screwed up one line and then they hit cut and Jay went to Kevin Smith. He goes, he messed up his line. And Kevin Smith just said, shut the fuck up. He's Alec Rickman. He can do whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah, I read that too, that Kevin Smith had Jason terrified of offending Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
just terrified about it. And this wasn't, I wouldn't say, the height of Jason Mewes' drug abuse, but it was the upward slant of it.
It was. So
I think when he hit Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, I think that's when he was really, really, really bad. But this really was bad, as he was amping up to that level of.
Is he okay now though? Or
he's been sober for
at least a decade, I want to say.
At least a decade.
Oh, I'm glad.
I mean, he occasionally smokes marijuana
sometimes, but yeah.
But what's hilarious is Kevin Smith didn't smoke pot until years later, and now he can smoke pot, and Jay doesn't.
When you say years later, because like I went, I think it was like maybe 5 or 10 years ago to something they had over at a local theater where he and Jason Mewes were there, and actually it was to watch Dogma, and they talked about it. But Kevin Smith is a big proponent of marijuana, so I know he's been on it for at least a decade, and he was telling young people who wanted to be writers, he's like, you smoke some weed, you get your creativity going. So, I mean, like to him, it's part of his creative process is smoking tons of pot. So I'm not sure if he was sober in any of these movies himself.
He's certainly looking good. So
yeah. I mean, so I don't know that Kevin Smith ever was a pot smoker is what I'm saying.
Well, no. Initially in the first, I would say until Dogma was when he first started smoking pot, because he wrote the just to be funny, two stoner guys that he said, oh, I'm just going to make Cheech and Chong. And he thought Jason Mewes was perfect because he was this goofy kid that he knew in his neighborhood that did funny things. So, but Jason Mewes, I think his main addiction, he was addicted to heroin.
Yeah, it was heroin.
And it was really bad for
heroin
him.
and coke, I believe.
Yeah, those are not good.
But he has cleaned himself up. I mean, he's much older now.
With a kid and everything now.
Yeah, I mean, if you
not
watch,
that couldn't be that with drug addiction,
right? But if you watch Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, it's very interesting because you see the stories that Kevin Smith's kind of told throughout his life, through stages of his life. Being a father, he has Jersey Girl, which I absolutely love that movie. Most people hate it, but I get what he's telling there. He was a new father at the time and kind of telling that story. The Jay and Silent Bob Reboot is him coming back and visiting these characters after so many years and how different things are. And Jason Mewes, I think Jason Mewes' little daughter is actually in the movie.
Aww.
So it's really cute. But they also bring back Matt Damon's character from Dogma.
Really?
He said that God forgave him and just sent him to a different boring state to live the rest of his life. He's like, look, it's Loki. And he's like, I was Loki before the MCU. But that's honestly, if you really look at this movie also and just kind of step back in terms of the farce of it, it's kind of like a comedic, not as much action, but it's like a Marvel movie. It's got its own like fantastic characters, and it's a comic book. It is a farce, but it, you really deep down, I think is what made this better for me watching it now, 20 years after when I was in my 20s, and I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go see a silly fun movie and get a little out of it. I got a lot more out of it this time out. Really, just all the different characters, and really just focusing on the interactions, what was really being said. And it just was like, wow, this is just a great movie. And it still holds up.
Oh, I think so too. In fact, like I said, sadly, in some ways, I think it's more apropos lately than it's been for a long time. In its well-deserved parody, let's put it that way, of church teachings. I actually was I forgot how much Ben Affleck and Matt Damon actually act in this film.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, they have some good moments, and when Ben Affleck is angry, when he finally like slips over into that bitterness that he does at the end, and he grabs Matt Damon, I thought, wow, there's a lot of like
pent-up rage there.
Yeah, rage, and Damon looks afraid. I mean, it's like I thought these guys are really doing this. It's like a real reminder of how much bigger Affleck is.
It comes real apparent. You're right. You don't think about it when you see that. You're like, geez, that guy's kind of tall, and okay. Most of the stuff he'd been in, you didn't really see him as a physical presence.
No, but
and at that moment, you're like, oh. Like even I would say in his Batman persona, he still doesn't have the physical impact that he has in the moment where he's like taking Matt Damon's character, where he's taking Loki to task and is angry at him. It's really impressive. And I don't watch a lot of Matt Damon or Ben Affleck movies, but I would say of the things I've seen, I think this was really their best acting job, period.
I was, again, pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed everything about the film. And Linda Ferrantino, I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't really think of her character much at all. This time I was really moved by her. And Chris Rock did such a great job in that, being that smart alecky kind of voice, but then shifting into truth. I mean, things that were valuable to say.
I agree with you. Chris Rock,
and compassion. He put the little scene around the fire when he was talking about Jesus as a little boy.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, exactly. Because I know growing up, I always kind of wondered that myself. I'm like, yeah, you get Jesus, he's born. And then you get Jesus, he's doing all the miracles. And it's like, well.
And the no sibling thing always blew my mind.
Oh,
I'm like, really? No, none? Okay.
Honestly, if you talk to biblical scholars, it's still a division, but the division is mostly Catholic and everybody else, because biblical scholars will say to you, they are called brothers and sisters. They're called the brothers and sisters. Mary shows up in the Gospel of Mark with the brothers and sisters of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
And Catholics went through a time period when I was young where they said, well, Joseph was much older than Mary, and he had been married before. So those were his children. And of course, it helped to make him an old man, because then, the idea of having sex with her would have been more ridiculous, right? Because he would have been an old man, and he would die sooner. Yeah, this is pre-Viagra, so. But that, biblical scholars now will say, oh, for heaven's sakes, that's not true. And Chris Rock actually, again, Catholic League, why were you complaining? Chris Rock actually defends the principle of the virgin birth. He actually says it around the fire. He says, yes, Mary had not known man when she had Jesus, but she was married for a number of years. And everybody I know who studies scripture will tell you that people at that time, children were a blessing. This whole concept we have about virginity and celibacy being the holy, that was not true at the time of Jesus. What you wanted was to have children. Those were the blessings of God. So there's no way you would have voluntarily decided not to have more children. That would have been like spitting in God's face. Plus, let's assume they loved each other. Would that be such a terrible thing?
Not at all. Not at all.
I mean, for years, I worked with a nun who didn't die until she was well into her 90s. She hadn't hit 100, but she was in her late 90s. But when I worked with her, she was in her 80s. And one time she said to me, if I get to heaven and find out that Jesus had a bunch of little brothers and sisters, I'm going to think, oh, good, Mary and Joseph loved each other.
Oh, that's sweet.
Sweet.
So,
or at least had a fun time.
That's right. I mean, so it's, but see, then that's because of that weird attitude about sex that,
I'll go back to the point you made earlier about abortion. It's funny to me because you have that conflict in the Catholic Church where abortion is bad, but so is birth control.
Yeah.
And sex education. Yeah. We're the one thing that could really make a difference.
Yeah.
They're like, no.
Yeah.
No, we don't want to prevent pregnancies. No. Just don't have sex.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the priests do, which is a real hypocrisy. But in any event, I've worked too long. I keep telling people I'm going to write a book someday, and there's not going to be one lie in it, and people are going to go, "Wow, really?
Do it."
But I will tell you, Jenny, you're absolutely right. But there are many, many studies that show that 80 to 90% of married Catholics use birth control.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I'm sure.
I mean, that's another thing. They bring up hypocrisy and Catholicism quite frequently, and I mean,
again,
yes, I use birth control. I mean, my parents, when they were married and both still Catholic, my father had a vasectomy, so.
I also knew an older Italian woman who once said, "I tell the Pope, play the game, make the rules." She was very adamant about. She had 6 children. She was done. Thank you very much. Which is a lot more than I would have had before I hit that point. It is. You're right. It's but actually, even Bartleby and Loki at the end, Loki ends up being deeply compassionate in his humanity and compassionate towards his friend who kills him. But, and then Bartleby, of course, standing in front of God, even though God blows his head up, but hugs him first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shows love, and then boom. Well, and also I thought was real dramatic about that moment and interesting was that, you see this very, very deep moment where it's just a gaze where you could just see that Bartleby being in the presence of God again is just all he wanted, really. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Is kind of what it seemed like. So that when he knew that she was going to end him, he was ready to welcome it. He wanted it. He was like, at least I'm back in God's, embrace kind of thing.
No, I agree. I thought that because I thought he could have put his hands over his ears too.
Mm.
I mean, everybody had been warned, if you're human, cover your ears. And he could have. He was standing right there. But
yeah.
So he did agree. I think he does choose to accept the consequence. And
a lot of ways, it's a very beautiful movie, aside from the Golgotha, which is the most horrific thing.
All right, let's talk about the shit monster.
Yeah,
let's do it.
I don't like actual toilet humor. I just never find it appealing. It's always disgusting to me. It's a natural process. I understand people fart, people take dumps. I get it. I don't find it all that amusing, like when comedians just go all over the fart and the shit jokes and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I don't want to really hear about you taking a dump and having to see a visual, huge, large, dripping everywhere. It was like, could I not watch that? I have a pretty cast iron stomach, and I was like,
yeah.
Look, I admit it was gross, but I still laughed. After watching it again, I was like, it's a shit monster. It's gotta be funny. I mean,
I love the whole concept behind the shit demon. Actually, Mary, maybe you could answer that. I've never really studied the demons of Catholicism. Is there actually a Golgothan?
Not that I'm aware
the mythology
of,
they put it together for it.
Although the mythology they built for it was clever, wasn't it?
It was very clever.
The blood and the sweat of the people who'd been killed on Golgotha. I mean,
all the criminals and as they died would defecate and all, and it formed the Golgothan. It's a very clever mythology.
It is a very clever mythology, but I could not find it anywhere. If it exists, it exists. Although this is a side note, but I did find out that there are lots and lots of crazy stuff on the internet. Lots and lots.
Wait a minute, you're just finding it now?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time, really. I mean, on the internet. I have certain sources that I go to because I trust them, but I don't often just type in a category and then see what comes up. And
okay, don't look up Q.
Wait, what?
Don't look up Q. Okay, just
yeah, really. Yeah, no. It was.
Don't look up Two Girls in a Cup. I mean,
well, even
sorry.
All right. It took me a while to actually hear it.
Way to go.
Even typing in angels, I mean, you get all kinds of it's like, what?
Did you have to erase your search history afterwards?
Yeah, maybe.
Was it unclean?
Yeah, well, no, I suppose because I didn't write angels doing it or something. I mean, you get everything from people who are positive they're angels. They have seen them. They have talked to them. They still hear them. And to people who are what I would consider more biblical scholarship, what angels were messengers from God, and and when were the wings added, when was this added, when it's not like so. And demons demons were in Judaism, but they were not the way we think. They weren't evil. All of the world had demons. The wilderness had demons. The sea had demons. That's why Jesus calming the sea in a storm is so impressive, because it was actually overcoming the demons of the sea. So it was a much broader term for like spiritual being. It really, that whole thing about Satan and the horns and fallen angels and all that came much, much, much later. That was not something Jesus would have taught or even thought about. And it's funny me saying that, because one of the things people have given me always through my life have been angels. Because I work for the church and I'm a woman, and they think I must like angels, and I don't even believe in them. So so I had all these collections of angels, and I finally just gave a lot of them away because I it was nice of people to think of me. And I guess they were sort of paying me a compliment, saying, oh, you're an angel-like person, but.
Note to self, don't get marry an angel. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess when I say I don't believe in them, I guess I don't think they're important. Maybe they exist. I don't know.
Demons.
I can tell you there are still demons. They came out of the ground a couple weeks ago, and they made crazy sounds.
The cicadas. I was yelling out of my back door, "Fornicate and die, you sons."
Apparently, my area is just cicadas will not show up in North Linden. Apparently, they're just like.
I mean, we didn't have much
people live there
over here either. But when I did visit Mary a couple weeks ago, wow.
Weren't they They were everywhere.
They were everywhere.
Every tree. Our front porch looked like a graveyard. We had to sweep it off every day of these dead cicadas. I saw squirrels running by with them in their mouth. I'd say, "Go get them, squirrels!"
I'm telling you, those are demons or some kind of things from hell.
Although, they're supposed to be good for the environment. So.
Are they? They just fatten up birds.
Oh, God.
My dogs ate them all before they can make noises. I wouldn't.
Oh, I hope not. I mean, it's not bad for them, but they say it could make their tummies a little sick.
Yeah, supposedly the wings and the exoskeleton might turn them up a little. But no, I don't think there were any here.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I envy everybody who didn't have them, but it's over now. Thank God.
Yes, it is. So besides the crazy poop monster, was there any other parts that either of you, like rewatching it now, watching it back then, that you were just kind of like, nah, I didn't care for this?
It's interesting that you asked it, because the whole Loki wanting to put forth the wrath of God against the idolaters scene, which, I had enjoyed a lot in the past, but when I was listening to the sins that Bartleby was talking about, I found it interesting that anytime they brought up pedophilia, they always had to add that it was a boy they did it with. Like, that made it worse. Like, if it was a little girl, it would have been okay, kind of. But not only was it underage, but it was a boy. Now, not only was it a child, but it was your son. And I don't know why, but it just
boy in Thailand. You're right.
Yeah, it just bugged me, And then there was the whole where he was talking about the one guy who got his girlfriend drunk and paid somebody else to have sex with her so he could break up with her. And it kind of it was awful, but they also kind of smoothed over that that's fucking rape. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, they didn't say, and you paid a guy to rape her. They just said, oh, and you paid this guy to have sex with her. And I was like, no, they paid this guy to rape her, And it just, those things really got me in a way that it didn't get me when I watched it before. I think mostly because I was reading stuff about whether or not homosexuality is actually a sin in the Bible, and some of the things articles I've read from biblical scholars have mentioned that the Greek translation is not men, but young boys. And so that it was actually supposed to be against pedophilia, not against homosexuality. But I'm like, but then why young boys and not young children? So it's okay if it's a young girl?
Well, at probably at the time that was written, yeah.
So I think that's why it just set me in this mood of the misogyny and the double standard when it comes to, like, pedophilia is bad. But pedophilia when it's little boys, worse.
Yeah. Well, one of the big scriptures that's always used to point out that, homosexuality is bad, is, I think it's in Leviticus. I can't remember. No, it's not in Leviticus. Anyway, there are strangers in town, and the people in town want to come and rape them, these two strange men.
Oh, isn't that Sodom and Gomorrah?
Sodom and Gomorrah, thank you. But I'm trying to remember.
I don't know where it is in the Bible, but I kind of remember the story. I'm sorry.
Maybe Exodus. I'm not an I studied New Testament pretty thoroughly, but Old Testament's more hit and miss for me. And but that was actually a story about if you let strangers into your house, you owed them hospitality, you owed them safety. So even though in the story he offers the strangers his daughters, which would not be my solution to that crisis, but the story was not about, I don't want you men to sleep with men. The story was, I don't want you to sleep with the men who are here under my protection. Now, again, does that take away the problem of the woman? No, of course it doesn't, because women were property. They were not considered equal in standing. Although there's some very strong women in the Old Testament, but they were more the exception than the rule. So, but gosh, I hadn't caught that. That's interesting. I do intend to watch it again, but but you're absolutely right. In that room, the guys that are sinning, it's boys. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, like I said, I was probably just being hypersensitive, but it really just struck me. Yeah. And then another, more of a funny, not so much, it didn't really upset me that much because, it's Jay and Silent Bob, so you don't have high expectations of their, enlightenment or awakening,
right.
But the scene where they talk about, when they first run into Bethany, where she runs into the prophets, where she's like, oh, wait, you're not protesters, are you? And they're like, no, we believe a woman's body is her own, she can make a choice. And then they follow, and she's like, well, why are you here? And they're like, and Jay says, because if they're here for an abortion, they must like to fuck.
Yeah, right.
It was like,
thanks
so
much.
close to being enlightened.
2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
Yeah. But it made sense for the characters. I didn't really get offended by it, but like the problem with me is that's a real mentality, like people, it's like the false allyship in a sense, where they're not really so much about advocating for women's rights or bodily autonomy. They're more about, hey, it benefits me, and she's probably, willing to have sex. So, I think that's where it put me in the mindset was, but I still didn't get too mad about it because, like I said, it's Jay and Silent Bob. You wouldn't expect Jay to be totally anything less than what he is.
The only thing that saves the introduction of Salma Hayek for me is she is so obviously manipulating the men. That's what saves that scene for me, because she's so obviously, like, oh, they're offering money, and then she looks at the other group, and then she looks back, and she's obviously playing them off each other, which I thought, well, at least it has who has the real power at this moment in her hand, which then makes a lot of sense when you get to see who she really is.
Mm-hmm. Inspiration. But also, when you do think about it in the context, inspiration, but she's inspiration in a, panties and a bra.
Yeah.
So, would they have had Azrael be a stripper?
No, you're right. They would not.
Salma Hayek is beautiful, so I do understand how, like, given the opportunity, if you could see her in basically a swimsuit, why wouldn't you try to take it? But, it was a interesting scene, shall we say.
Yes, it was.
And you have to admit the first frontal nudity in the movie was Alan Rickman, so.
Yeah.
That is very true.
The only butt you see is Chris Rock's. So there
So
he's lying on the ground.
True story. So you can't really, like, say Kevin Smith was not, was just about exploiting women. He was like, well, we're going to put bodies up there.
Yeah.
That's true.
But his moral center is a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, the moral struggle is a woman character, is Linda Ferrantino. Mm-hmm. So, and the God's a woman.
God's a woman. God's Alanis Morissette.
Although again, why were people angry about this? Chris Rock says to her, actually, God's not a woman or a man.
Right.
See, this is, I actually found The Messiah by Mel Gibson much more offensive.
Never watched it, but I'll take your word for it. You're like, don't.
I actually, after I saw it, I went around for a long time telling people, please don't go see The Messiah. Don't give him any more money. Don't encourage him to ever do this again. But to me, that was a much more offensive piece.
And it was more graphic. That's what gets me in that movie, that you have a movie like this that they protested, and you have a movie like The Messiah that they were taking busload church groups to go see.
A Jesus slasher film.
It was worse than a slasher film.
It was not that, and the anti-Semitism in it, and people divide that up one side and down the other, but I'm sorry, it was a very anti-Semitic film.
I agree with you 100%.
Actually, I think we were talking about this before we hit record, but Mary, you had mentioned that that on your second watch, or on this recent watch, that you had noticed that it was not actually as violent as you recalled it, that it was more implied.
Right. That the violence, most of the violence happens off screen. When he shoots the guy in the bus, we don't see that. in the boardroom, he goes around and points out all their sins to them. Bartleby does that, right?
Yes.
Correct.
And then Loki starts firing, but we don't see them till they're dead. And there's blood on the one girl. Even the big scene in front of the church, we have a little grainy glimpse of it on a television set at one point, which is, but we don't see.
Right.
It's just
you don't. Yeah. You don't see the wings actually get cut off.
No, they fire it off. They shoot it off.
They shoot them off.
Shoot off wings,
the shoot off wings. But even when Ben Affleck's character drops that body, that's right in front of them. A body would have just exploded.
Exactly.
And splattered blood on them.
But instead, it's just a headless body.
Yeah.
So and the whole scene where Jason Lee, which I loved. See, again, this is a Catholic film. The fact that the bishop blesses his clubs makes it into a holy weapon. Come on. I mean, that's like right out of the Book of Orthodoxy, I mean, like, oh yeah, he blessed. Or she blesses the water and they can kill the demon in it.
That's now holy water.
Yeah. That's 1950 Catholicism, really. I mean, and this is a side story, but there used to be a tradition of kissing the ring of a brand new priest. Once he was ordained, you would kiss his ring, and but that fell out of favor years ago. And but then we started having this new resurgence of what I would call kind of conservative regressivism in the Catholic Church. The younger folks have kind of gone backwards, but this young priest was ordained, and he actually said to me, "Do you want to kiss my ring?" And I said no. So I mean, because give me a break. But
I'm surprised you didn't say something else.
Well, I was going to say, did you have a moment there where you're like, well, you could kiss this?
There was a Franciscan priest. I had dinner with a whole group of people, but Jeremy, and he, marvelous writer, Franciscan priest, and Father Jeremy was sitting next to me at this dinner, and I told him the story about this guy who said, will you kiss my ring? And he said, oh, I said, well, what do you get if you kiss somebody's ring? And Father Jeremy says, well, you get an indulgence. And I said, well, what do you get if you kiss his ass? And he said, you get a plenary indulgence. So see, there are good and humorous and kind people out there, but
so now I'm curious, what is the distinction between indulgence and plenary indulgence? I mean,
okay, this is again, please keep in mind, I don't believe in indulgences, but indulgences we were always told as children that yes, you confessed your sins, but it was sort of like you can't get rid of all the stain that sin leaves behind, but an indulgence could. So you would say certain prayers, and sometimes you'd ask for the indulgence for someone else, or you'd ask for it for yourself. Again, this is 1950, 1960 Catholicism. We don't promote a whole lot of that right now. Well, some places do, but anyway. Plenary indulgence was you went to confession, you confessed your sins, and then you did something, which was usually a series of prayers in a special place. So like right now, I'm not making this up, right now the Roman Church is offering plenary indulgences because this is the year of St. Joseph. So if you do a great kindness for someone else and help them out, like St. Joseph, the worker, then you can get a plenary indulgence. It's actually much better and healthier than the way I learned it. These are actually like good things to be, but so it's not just ooh magic, walk through the door. Plenary indulgence is a clean slate. It wipes it all. But like John Wayne was baptized on his deathbed as a Catholic, And part of the reason he did that was because he was very attached to Ireland. He went to Ireland a lot and fell in love with the country. And he decided that he would be baptized close to his death so that he could go straight to heaven, because that would be a clean slate. So,
wow.
yeah. So, that kind of stuff. Indulgences are also the greatest embarrassment of the Catholic Church, because they were sold. That's one of the things Martin Luther complained about.
I remember that.
Was that they were sold to raise money for the Crusades. So people would say, "Oh, you can get 25 years off your time in purgatory if you donate." I know. Years matter.
Wow.
It's like paying off a corrupt judicial system, isn't it?
Exactly.
So what do I get if I help somebody with their groceries?
Well, thank you.
Oh, okay.
Well, there lies the dilemma. If you're doing an act of kindness to get a reward, are you really doing an act of kindness?
Of course not.
Isn't that a good point?
Yeah, of course not.
Really, you're just doing a service for payment at that point. It's just not necessarily material.
I agree. Actually, the theology, I don't know if you ever watched The Good Place when it was on.
I thought that was an amazing show.
Great show.
Yeah, I was going to say the theology of The Good Place was some of the most solid theology I've seen in a long time. Because they were so consistent with things like that. You can't do good because it's going to get you points. That doesn't get you points. You have to do good because you want to do good, because you care about other people, because
Mm-hmm.
So,
which is not to say that you can't benefit from doing a good deed. Like my beliefs, which are tenuous and not really formed or dogmatic or religious of any sort. But I always feel like if you do something good just because you wanted to do something, or just because you wanted to help somebody out and you feel good about it, I don't think that takes away from it. You know what I mean? So, which is another argument where you can never really do a true good deed freely, because if you do something good, you feel good and you get a benefit. So therefore it wasn't, but I'm like, but that wasn't your goal. If your goal was just because this person needs help, I want to help this person, and then you felt good as a result of doing it, that's just a bonus.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you were confirmed. When I used to run a confirmation class, the students, they were 7th and 8th graders, and they all had to do some service projects. And this one young man came up to me at the confirmation retreat and said, I'm going to have to find another service project. And I said, why? Because he had this great service project. He was cutting the grass and raking the leaves, and had intended over the winter, we hadn't gotten to winter yet, but he was intending to shovel her lawn for a widow that lived next door to him who was in her late 70s. And he said, I got to find a new project. And I said, why? And he said, well, because every time I do something like that, he said, she knows I won't take money, but she'll say, come on in, and she'll have fresh cookies, or she'll have apple cider and donuts, or, or something. I know. And
wow.
And we sit and talk. And he said, I look forward to it. So I don't think it can be my service project anymore. And I said, sweetheart, it isn't supposed to be painful. Of course, it can still be your service project. That in some ways you've made it even more valuable, because now you're offering her two.
Yeah, because she's probably loving the company.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
she probably loves the conversation. Yeah.
So I did laugh at that. He said, I probably am going to have to get another service project. I said, no, sweetheart, it's not.
I need to suffer.
I know. Well,
it goes back to the suffering.
The way it's often taught, it makes you feel that that's necessary. That, it's not that you can just be a good person. You have to suffer in goodness, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
You must give till you're in rags and tatters and have nothing for yourself.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of suffering. No suffering. I actually don't even think, in my humble opinion, that Jesus was supposed to suffer. I think Jesus was supposed to teach us how to care for each other. But we humans, we earthlings, whatever you want to call us, we kill people who tell the truth. Jesus isn't the only one we've done that to, and won't be the last either, or hasn't been the last.
Interesting look if you think about witch trials and stuff.
Yeah. Isn't it funny? We were raised to be afraid of the women they burned, and not the crazy people burning them.
I was just about to say the same thing. I mean, come on.
I mean, I don't know if my parents skipped that lesson or not, but I was never afraid of the people they burned, but I've always been afraid of the people that burn them.
Well, I mean, I can remember it being, oh, they were witches, but then it's like, no, they were crazy people. I think it took Monty Python to make me aware of it. That scene in
A witch.
Yeah,
I've always been fascinated by them,
made me
which tells you so much about me. I've been fascinated by witches since I was a child. It's my favorite Halloween costume.
Yeah, it's a very. Oh well.
Yeah, no, it's
Well, I mean, how long are we supposed to go? Because I think I'm moving out of
right.
it up whenever.
All right, well, let's wrap it up. Well, we'll say this. We all pretty much, I can say, we really enjoy this movie. I do wish people could stream this movie.
Oh yes, we have to bring this up.
Unfortunately, you can't.
It's like the only one I think you can't.
It's the only one, yeah. So I just found this out recently. So this is the only movie that Kevin Smith, even though he wrote, directed this movie, he doesn't own.
No kidding.
This movie belongs to the Weinsteins.
Oh.
Because they produced it. Because originally it was supposed to come out as a Miramax film, but Miramax was Disney, and
Disney got scared, probably.
And Disney got scared, so the Weinsteins sold it to Lionsgate, and then the Weinsteins bought the rights to the movie. And a couple of years ago, actually a week before Harvey went to jail, he contacted Kevin Smith and he said, "Hey, I'm going to give you back the rights to Dogma, and I want you to make a sequel." A week later, Harvey Weinstein ended up in jail.
Yeah.
Now, I'll call it a rumor, but what has been rumored and reported on the internet was Harvey Weinstein made this deal with a lot of different directors, like Quentin Tarantino and a couple other people from the Miramax days, so they could have the rights back to their movies, because he wanted to be in active production as a loophole to going to jail. It didn't happen fast enough. So now the rights to this movie are in limbo. The Blu-ray copy that I own, I looked it up on eBay, which is one that I bought at a Kroger's on an impulse buy because it was $5, $4.99, is now worth $300 because it's out of print.
Sure. Wow.
It's crazy because this movie if you own a copy of it, you can, watch it that way, but it's very hard to actually,
it's on YouTube.
Stream it. It is on YouTube, which is funny.
It's on YouTube.
It is on YouTube illegally, but it's on YouTube.
Is it illegal?
Yeah. Oh. When stuff gets when movies get posted like that on YouTube, Mary, it is against the copyright. And so at any given time, they can be reported and be taken down. I mean, don't get me wrong. Jenny and I
Police aren't going to come to your house, Mary.
Yeah, no, it's nothing like that. No, but if you were the one that uploaded it, yes, they would come to your house.
If you just watched it.
If you didn't watch it, yeah, no, because Jenny and I have watched many of old television for this program and many of old things that are out of print for that way, because they're not streaming anywhere, or they're just
they were never put on anything released, so the only option is to watch it on YouTube.
Yeah,
but
VHS.
Back to the point about the rights and stuff. It says also, when I looked it up, that in addition, apparently, like Kevin Smith had cut off contact with the Weinsteins in 2011.
Yeah.
Supposedly because Weinstein had acted really disrespectfully at a premiere of Smith's film Red State. But, they don't go into details about disrespectfully. So it could be anything from like Weinstein tried to grope his wife to who knows, Because, I mean, what would Kevin Smith consider inappropriately? What I mean?
Right.
It's an interesting vagueness that I'm like, how inappropriate and in what manner? What could you possibly do that would offend Kevin Smith?
Or disrespected his daughter.
Yeah, that could be another one.
Or maybe he just, from everything I've read about Weinstein, he was pretty much a general jackass.
Yeah.
So
May he rot in prison and die.
Amen. So if you can, catch it when it's on television. Find it on YouTube if you can, but I highly recommend watching this. I mean, it definitely got better rewatching it 20 years after my initial watch of it. It still is, funny, entertaining.
It holds up today.
Yeah.
Like, you won't look at it and think of this being that dated. Even like the costuming and stuff, you would be like,
Not at all. Not at all.
It could have been filmed last week.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And the only caveat I would add to that is never get your theology from a piece of popular fiction. I don't care. I don't care if it's this or the Da Vinci Code or the Omen or whatever, I mean, it's use your own brain. Don't go head first into anything and say, oh, that's it.
Or the internet.
Or the internet. That's right. And do keep in mind that there are crazy people out there. And that doesn't mean they're angels.
Yeah, and just to Mary's earlier point, question and be willing to change your idea or belief if you can. Because if you stick yourself just to one way of thinking, I don't know, it's really hard not to become a terrible person if you have no flexibility. Yeah,
I agree. Flexibility is a sign of intelligence, period. I think inflexibility is a sign of weakness and dumbness, I guess. I can't think of the right word I want to use here. But yeah, no, if you don't change, you're not growing. That's all there is to it. So
yeah.
Not fun, but it's important.
Well said.
Yeah. So
thanks for
Dogma.
inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being on. This has been a great discussion, Mary. Really.
Yes, thank you, Mary.
Yeah,
probably one of our most mature discussions because usually we swear a lot and just go crazy.
There was a little swearing.
Well, I'd say I'm his mother-in-law, so he has to
behave a little bit.
I mean, I was still me, so yeah.
You see what a smart family we are, all of us, in-laws and everybody. And Aaron, thank you for your work. Even though
till next time.
Big square.
This has been What the Fuck Did I Just Watch?